away. We're excited.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everyone. The presentation I'll be kind of going through today will touch on a lot of the same concepts around administration that Ahmed touched on in his presentation. I want to take a little bit deeper to really talk about how you can use some of the tools that are inside of that M365 experience to be able to help you understand what AI usage is happening in your organization from a monitoring perspective, as well as what you can do from a controls perspective to really dig into putting some governance around how AI is used in your organization, not even just necessarily within M365 tools, Copilot, for example, but how you can use those same tools to really govern and control any AI tool in your environment. A little bit about me. I have been in the Microsoft ecosystem for almost 25 years now. I was in consulting for a couple decades. I'm working as a M365 architect, Datasight currently, and still continuing to understand and press the bounds of what Microsoft tools are available through licensing SKUs like the E5 and being able to use those to their full extent. For that same amount of time that I've been in IT, I've also been married for 25 years and I have 3 boys. So, between IT and family keeps me busy. And then I also I love music as well. I'm a foodie. So between all those, definitely keeps me busy. I've also been on the board of the user group for almost 2 years. So it's always great to connect with the community, be able to share some of this information with them. You can see my LinkedIn and website here. If you check the website, I'd say probably tomorrow, I'm going to take a lot of this same content and with the power of Copilot, distill it down into a really nice blog that you can glance over and be able to have some resource information as well after the fact. And Michelle and Dawn, if you have any questions that pop up in the chat, feel free to interrupt me. Happy to take those as they come up from the community. And thinking about this whole concept of administration and AI and seeing how AI has just exploded and seeing how even within the organization that I'm helping to administer, new AI tools are being introduced every day. Some of them have a lot of business value. Some of them may not even be safe to use in a corporate environment. And so really having visibility into those particular tools and being able to make educated decisions on what you should allow from an AI perspective and what you should just straight out from a security perspective, consider it blocked, consider it unsanctioned, and knowing how to find those tools to be able to show you what is in the environment is key. And so as we dig in a little bit more here over the next hour, we're going to touch on some of the tools that are available through just your basic E5. And then if you were to extend that further to Purview, and then really what you get from a Copilot licensing perspective, we'll touch on the details of what those tools unlock and what you need to do to configure those inside of the environment that you are working in or administering today. And so as we look at really the high level, why is it important to keep an eye on what AI usage is happening in your organization? We're going to touch on, thinking about this presentation, there's a lot in terms of the Microsoft tools, the 365 Admin Center that's available as part of your Copilot licenses. Viva Insight unlocks some really cool information. And then one thing that I've found within our organization that has been extremely helpful in being able to identify what usage is happening in AI is really what's happening with your SaaS, what's happening in your Defender for cloud apps, being able to look at those applications, understanding who's actually accessing and how much usage is invaluable. And then to take it to the next level, there's some really great tools that have been introduced through Purview to be able to help you not only have visibility into AI, but there's a lot of great tools that you can use there as well to enforce policies around protecting your organization. We'll talk through some scenarios that I've seen, as well as some best practices around AI and resources that you can use to access any of these reports within your M365 environment today. So let's talk about why we want to monitor AI usage. comes to this rise of generative AI and how they're connecting to all of our productivity tools, not even just necessarily Microsoft. You can see other tool sets where they'll start to integrate into browser extensions, into adding to your M365 environment, and being able to recognize those is important because of the risks and the opportunities that they introduce within your business, as well as the importance of being able to be transparent and compliant and govern AI within your organization.
Hey, Chris.
So a couple of statistics here. Yes, go for it.
You are cutting in and out for some reason. I'm not sure if your internet connectivity is causing problems, but we're getting some feedback that missing some words and key points as you're talking.
It might be my connectivity. I wanted to make sure I had the camera off to be sure that it gave as much bandwidth to the audio in the presentation. Is it unusable? Is it problematic?
Let's see. It seems like it's getting a little bit better. It just is every other couple words every once in a while. Seems to be dropping. I mean, I heard it as well. So I'd say let's just see what happens.
Okay. Yeah. If you want to just interrupt me again if it breaks up or is unusable for multiple seconds at a time, happy to revisit it. I'm not moving. I'm sitting stationary, so you never know what's happening between me and the Microsoft infrastructure for doing the presentation. So if need be, I can always stop to the sharing and represent, because I know sometimes that can help with some of the connectivity too.
Agreed. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you for that feedback. Let's talk about this rise of generative AI tools. So, and I've got a couple of different statistics here that shows how much those tools are being introduced into organizations. We're seeing that companies are sorry about that. Companies are continuing to see that rise within their workplace. That we're looking to use AI within the next few years. And this was even back in 2023. It's definitely exploded even more so since then. And then by Forbes, we're going to see over hundreds of billions in revenue around AI. This was even just last year that information was projected. And then looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they can see that in the field of AI is almost to 20%. So a lot of these statistics we're seeing are continuing to accelerate when it comes to how are being introduced and how we're seeing those in the environments. And we can see because of that, AI is everywhere and it can be scary. We can see that because of some of these tools, they are seeing data through those platforms. And that's why it's important to understand and know organizations are introducing these tools, how they work in the environment, and even more so why visibility, reporting, and control are paramount. And being able to see a lot of the organizations introducing these tools are not having very much transparency when it comes to how they look at the privacy of your data, any of the ethical dilemmas such as looking at bias and being able to see what security risks those introduce as well. And then as we look at some of the biggest risks of AI, it's really, as I just mentioned, transparency and bias and discrimination. That extends to privacy, ethical dilemmas, and security risks. These are really important when it comes to understanding how AI takes your data and what does it really do with that data after the fact. And then looking at the Gartner threatscape, you can see there are a plethora of different threats that are being introduced and continuing to rise. Some of the critical threats, two of them actually, as you can see, are really around AI, like deepfakes is big, application compromise. So you need the tools that you might be using for AI and how safe are those from attacker. I mean, ensuring that the organizations that your company, your employees, the data that it touches is safe is important. And then as we look at really the whole concept of training itself, be able to understand how AI can help us be more successful, and at the same time understand how it's ethically used. There are 4 core areas that I think are really important to look at. The compliance and governance and how that applies from transparency is really important. Being able to understand the bounds of how your systems work, the tools that you use are applying, and how they respect the law and ethical standards is important. Understanding the tools that you use and how transparent those organizations are. If there's something wrong, if you need to understand how that data is being used, and those organizations being forward about how that data is stored, how your data is protected, in accountability is very important. Having that trust around the data is even more so if there is a leak, and this is not even applying to AI tools, but it's really any platform that you're using, software as a service, any cloud-based platforms, understanding if there is a breach or something that happens with that data. Are they letting their customers know what is happening with that data and how is it protected? And then understanding how transparent not only those organizations are, but the technology that they use. So that way you can share that with your leadership, with your stakeholders, to continue to build confidence around those technologies, as well as being able to understand what risks AI introduces. What is happening when you're connecting a tool to your company's information, to your M365 environment? A lot of these tools do require broad access to all of your employees' information. And so what is happening when these organizations are seeing all of your data? Is there any concern with how they are protecting that data? And at what extent are they using that data, and just the use that your employees need to facilitate AI versus touching everything that's within your organization? So we painted the picture of why reporting is important, why transparency is important, and understanding how these organizations use our data. So then how can you take that into your own hands? How can you understand the tools that are at your disposal to be able to see some of this usage and still be able to leverage AI's transformative capabilities within your organization? And if you are a Microsoft tool shop, which is at the root of a lot of the tools we're going to talk about here in just a moment, some of these you're already able to access today. Some of them, will require some Copilot licenses. So we'll touch on how those are being used or how those can be used. So as we talk through those 4 core tools, between the Copilot Control Center, being able to look at tools like Defender for Cloud Apps, being able to get that visibility through the Viva Insights and for analytics, and being able to look at the data protection inside of Purview. These all paint one picture of being able to help you not only with reporting, visibility into the data, so that way you can make a informed decision on how you want to protect that data, but also how can you enact controls to ensure that if these activities are occurring that are unsanctioned or you don't want to allow in your organization, that you're able to stop them as they occur. So we'll talk about each of these tools, how they paint that picture from a reporting perspective, how they enable you to control that data and those platforms as we use those within our organization. So let's first touch on the core one that's available. It's the M365 Admin Center, and how Microsoft is taking all of those Copilot tools into what is now the Copilot Control Center. What we can look at from a readiness perspective when it comes to ensuring that we are set up for success when using Copilot, and then what tools we can look at from a reporting perspective, from trends, user engagement, and some of the feature utilization. And so Ahmed touched on this in his presentation as well, but the Copilot Control Center is something that I think rolled out in June. They're continuing to enhance the capabilities so that way you have one place to enable your data protection, have access to management controls, analytics, and security. It's really a springboard to take you into some of the other tools that we'll be mentioning, to be able to look at your Viva insights, to be able to control your policies through Purview, etc. This is really the heart of it, and it's that fancy little Copilot icon that is sitting inside of your admin center that will take you into these different tools. As we look at those tools in a more granular view, we can look at some of the configuration scenarios where we're looking at the logging, controlling access to features like image creation. Edge is used, Copilot is used in tools like Edge, etc. So configuring how Copilot is used in your tenant, the Copilot Control Center is the springboard to that, and being able to have access to shortcuts to some of the other admin centers that you'll need to create or control those policies, aka some in Teams. That would be inside the Teams admin center, Power Platform, Dynamics, being able to look at Copilot Chat inside of Power Platform, and being able to configure some of those tools within your Microsoft operating systems, as well as some of the software like Bing, Edge, etc. And then being able to control agents. We're in that era of agentic proliferation, where agents will be able to really help us empower how we use some of these tools quicker and easier. And so Microsoft has introduced the ability to look at the inventory, being able to control how those agents are used, being able to take agents that you have created in your environment and assign them to different users or user groups. That allows you to use role-based access and group access to give your users access to those agents, being able to approve access to agents, and being able to who actually can use agents within your environment as well. And then being able to look at it from a billing perspective, since Microsoft has reached that point now with Copilot to where they can do more of a pay-as-you-go model, a flat rate with some of the tools that we've seen to date with Copilot. So now I can have a pay-as-you-go subscription, and then as those tools are used, I can then pay for just the usage versus having to pay for the whole organization at once. In the Copilot control system, we've got the overview. It shows how many users that are licensed are using each of the tools. Very helpful view to understand where there may be opportunities from an adoption perspective to be able to say, how can we help our organization be more effective in using Copilot in PowerPoint or Excel or maybe even OneNote? This gives us that ability to then start to craft some of those communications to encourage people to use those particular tools and Copilot in those tools, and maybe even give them tips and tricks to help them be more successful in their prompting and the use of those tools. One of the things that I found is, yes.
There is a question in there, and I think it was maybe either this last slide or the slide before, but Jason was asking, is there yet ability to choose which user groups can use agents versus create agents?
That's a great question. I know from the ability to be able to allow users to be assigned agents, that we have that capability. And then I think being able to control who has access to be able to actually have access to them. There is that capability. Let me follow up on that one towards the end of our call as we're looking at some of the surveys, and I'll pull up that information and drop that note into the chat. Great
Perfect.
question.
Thanks, Chris.
We have any others at the moment?
Nothing else so far.
Okay. Fantastic. All right, so let's dig in a little bit deeper and talk about some of the reporting. As you see here, this is a really nice view of overall visibility, but we have the ability inside of the Copilot usage reports to export all of our users and what tools they use, and actually look at the last date that those tools. This is really helpful. We're starting to look at we can help our users be more successful, and even potentially see how our users are or are not using Copilot. So in environments where we have a fixed number of licenses, this might be a lever to be able to pull to say, we have groups of users that are just clamoring to use Copilot, and we have individuals that aren't touching those tools. Maybe this is an opportunity to go to those users and say, let's shift your license off for now, because you're not really using it to the extent that maybe we want to see others in that organization that can really help to save them a lot of time. This will allow you to understand who those people might be, and transversely be able to maybe even target some campaigns to help them use some of those tools more. It also, inside of Copilot, has built-in survey mechanisms, and there's also ways to use tools like Pulse surveys and Glint to take some of that survey data and pull it into some of the insights to help fuel what some of those NPS survey insights are. This particular one around Copilot is one that's built in that will pop up from time to time inside of the Office apps. If the people or your users are prompted, built into the Office apps to understand how they like Copilot, would they recommend Copilot? So this is a dashboard inside of the survey insights that will produce this information natively within Copilot. This one you don't have control over. To be able to really have a targeted survey to your users, it's recommended to use tools like Glint or Pulse, and then bring that data into this particular dashboard so you have some overall insights.
Hey, Chris,
as we start to look at reporting, yes.
You want to go back one more before? Yeah. So Michael was asking about, was there for the previous report, can you get a single user information, or is it aggregate?
So this particular report is aggregate across all users. If you go into the usage report, you can export this into Excel, and you can look at all of your users and then filter it down to a single one.
Okay, perfect.
So if I had 100 users in my organization, all with M365 Copilot license, and I go into the usage reports, I can export this. I can see Joe Smith, used it today, but maybe didn't use anything except Outlook or Teams for Copilot versus some of the other tools. I do have the ability to go very granularly into there inside of the usage reports without having to even export it out to Excel as well. So that is available in the portal as well. Great question.
Right. Yep, thanks, Chris.
This is probably the one that I access on a weekly basis and share with my leadership, so that way they can see how effective some of the Copilot usage is within the organization. This is a great snapshot, but really where you'll start to get more rich analytics is inside of Viva Insights. There are some thresholds that you have to hit for you to be able to get granular access into group information. However, even without that threshold of Copilot license, you still get some of the usage and metrics trends. And then taking it to that next level for some of the insights, we'll show you what those look like here in a moment. I think that's where you really have a lot of the deep capabilities, where you can just really start to show the value of the Copilot licenses inside the organization and where those time savings are. So let's talk about how we activate the insights within the organization. If we have less than 50 Copilot licenses or less than 50 Viva Insight licenses assigned, we will function in this limited function mode, where we can look at just the readiness page, some of the information, and some of the tenant level sentiment information, where we really get granular into some of the usage within your organization, and being able to unlock group level metrics. And the impact page around those group level metrics is when you have 50 users. As we start to look at how those are applied, if you do have the M365 Copilot license, as you can see here, we have this Viva Insights as one of the licensed services that's part of that particular SKU. And so That's why if you have 50 Copilot licenses, it really does unlock this Viva Insights. You can still unlock those same insights if you buy the Insights licenses separately and haven't met this Copilot threshold to be able to get some of the visibility across your organization. And so here's an example of some of the insights where you can get an example of how many Copilot actions were taken within this period of time. This is real data within a 30-day period of time. We can see how many actions were taken with Copilot across all the different tools and how many estimated hours that users have saved by using Copilot within those tools. Where you start to get some of the detailed metrics inside of the Viva Insight metrics is you will get information on how many meetings had intelligent recap, where you had emails that were assisted with Copilot. And this would really, you see more value in the email component of Copilot when you do use the new Outlook. So that's what is certainly recommended to be able to give that rich functionality from an Outlook perspective. How many chats summarized documents, as well as Copilot chat. That's the one that's included with your MN365 license, where you can query AI, but not necessarily query organization data and have the capabilities that you have with M365 Copilot. But where you start to get some of that granular metrics is being able to look at targeted within your organization. So as Microsoft looks at the users that have access to that license, it's able to understand what their department is, who their manager is. It starts to build up an org structure. So then as we're looking at these two particular groups, let's say this one rolls up to a leader within the IT org. This one rolls up to a leader in the marketing org. We can see within each of these different insights those particular parts of the organization measure up. So you can see where that difference is. In this particular data, it's only surfaced if we have those 50 licenses in Copilot or Insights enabled. What we also can then do is, as metrics, by default, Microsoft has this set to 10, but if we wanted to bring it down, if we have a smaller number of Copilot licenses, but we want to make sure that we're able to capture some of those group sizes, we can have that turn down. The minimum we have is lower in that inside of the privacy set in Viva Insights, and then we start to be able to build out those metrics a little bit more. So as you can see here, we within our organization, there are certain groups that do fall within that size or under that size, so it's not really starting to measure their data until those particular parts of the organization see at least 5 or more Copilot licenses or Viva Insights licenses enabled. One thing that I found inside of the Viva Insights that really adds a lot of value is their advanced analytics reports that they have built in to be able to really get granular into some of those metrics. There's over 100 that we can start to filter through. One of the steps that you do need to do first is being able to go through to access this information is to have your admins, even your global admins, they don't have access to that reporting data by default. So if you are looking to allow access to this information to an admin or maybe someone within your organization, they do need to have that insights analyst role assigned, and then they'll start to see the reports inside of Viva Insights, especially the ones not only necessarily Copilot, but how Viva is taking organization data, even how your users are using their Office apps, how your users are accessing data. That information, even apart from Copilot, is metrics that are being pulled into Viva Insights to allow you to understand how those apps are being used. And then once you have that role assigned to your users, at that point, you can then go in and run or set up the analytics on the report. You have to go in and run it the first time, or you could set it to run on a programmatic basis, and then you'll start to see some of those recent results be queried inside of the advanced analytics. So it's really a two-step process. it's the licensing, it's the analyst role, and then I set up the report. And then at that point in time, I then am able to produce a real-time snapshot of how Copilot is saving me and my organization not only time and money through some of those impacts analysis. So as I can see here, if I have 50 users, it can see I've taken over 15,000 actions within almost a 6-month period of time, and how much value it's estimated that Copilot has saved the organization in time just based on how they're using those tools. So Insights, it does take you a little bit further than what we were able to see inside of the M365 Admin Center. We can see how those tools are used, but really Viva Insights gives us that rich reporting on what value those tools are being able to add. And then it gives you this really nice report here. There's different components to this around the usage. So some of these do allow you to drill into some of the different tools that we saw here on how it allowed you to save time around meetings, emails, chats, documents, and Copilot chat. We see some of those here inside of the report on the side. And then the nice thing about this as well, if you publish this report, you can then assign it to other people in the organization where they can come in and almost like it's a Power BI, and you can show your leaders in your organization so they can come in and access that on demand as well. So now that we've covered really visibility into the application usage around Copilot, let's start to take a look broader. Let's look at more AI use across the organization. And the tooling for us to be able to do that is really what I found is the most powerful Defender for Cloud Apps. It allows you to really look at the audit logs that come off that. We start to look at how AI is used. We'll be able to look at some of the cloud app usage by being able to detect AI across the organization. If I am an M365 environment and I'm using E5 and I'm using Defender, all of that information works together to be able to understand what apps are used in my organization, and then look at the broader use of AI apps on your users across the organization, not only just generative AI applications, which Microsoft has introduced the ability to really drill in and see easily, but maybe I want to see all across my organization, maybe not even necessarily AI specific. It's a great tool to be able to report on how those are used. As we consider the concept of the CASB or Cloud App Security Broker and application detection, moving away from, I say bad, but it's more a traditional mindset where in a cloud-based world, if some of us that have been admins for a long time, we were looking at firewall logs, we had stale reports, admins had to respond to that information. It's very involved. With Defender for Cloud Apps, it's made it a lot easier just by onboarding your devices with Defender. That Defender agent is supported across multiple environments, Windows, Mac, virtualized cloud, and then being able to have that comfort that we can detect shadow IT and not only understand our apps, but because we have Defender, we can also block those apps that we see as unsanctioned. So the first step in using the Defender for Cloud Apps the most successfully, especially in a dispersed workforce, cloud-based environments, is really onboarding Defender. And then within Defender itself, there's really two components. It's turning on the integration for Defender for Endpoint to send data or feed data from Defender for Cloud Apps, but also the ability for Defender for Endpoint and Defender for Cloud Apps to enforce app access. We'll come back here to some of the user notification components in just a couple of slides. But once we've pushed that Defender onboarding to our endpoints and we've turned on these two features, these two settings, we then can start to enforce how users are accessing their applications. And typically enforcement from a cloud app perspective as broadly, but in more specific controlling generative AI apps, what's the easiest is being able to create really two policies. One of them would be to look at applications that Microsoft would consider as risky. So those are ones that have a risk score of under 5 or 0 to 5. In this case, we consider it generative AI. And what we would do in that case is we would find any new application that appears in the environment that's risky, that's underneath of that risk score, as unsanctioned. And what that'll automatically do is users will get to a page that says that it's blocked, or what we'll look at in just a second, we have the ability to customize what that message is that we send to our end users. So that would be unsanctioned apps, being able to have apps that are monitored. So essentially those are ones that users receive almost like a splash page or a warning page when they access it the first time. They still are able to access it, and then we can control which thresholds they will see that message. So they're not prevented to getting to those applications, but they're alerted that, hey, this may not be approved by the organization. It's not necessarily bad, but we want you to be aware that you are using a tool that IT hasn't considered as sanctioned. What we can do then is we can define a customized pages that users will access to not only have that monitored URL, so that would be this first one that Microsoft considers a notification URL, but then also URL that we have for our blocked apps as well. And you can actually host those on a SharePoint page, since your users that are environment with Defender for Endpoint are using an Entra ID that allow them to authenticate to be able to access those pages by way of, without having to do any special steps to be directed to those pages simply by us having a customized URL in there. So what I usually do is three things. We'll have one page set up that defines what our organization's, let's say, application policy or generative AI policy is, that are embedded within these two other pages. So really the endpoint to being able to show users that this is a monitor page, or this is a monitor app, or this is an unsanctioned app, will be those two URLs. But then there they have a little warning splash page. Then you could have another page that redirects your users to your company policy around those pages. Then it's specific to how your organization looks at those applications. So that would be under your user notifications URLs. And you can actually set a bypass duration as well. So typically for a work day, you have an 8-hour a day. Maybe you have users that come in early or work late. And typically 12 hours is fairly reasonable subset of the day to be able to send users to that monitored URL. So then every day that they try to access that application that hasn't been defined as sanctioned, they'll be sent to that URL. And then as we configure the environment, we start to get an understanding of how those applications are used. We can then start to go granular into applications and who are our users that are accessing it. How much data is that application sending? What is that app's class for? And then that's generally broken down by how Microsoft looks at it from generalized security, compliance, and legal. All the applications that are in the Cloud App Discovery portal have this breakdown that Microsoft helps you as an admin and being able to really communicate to your leadership on why these applications are considered risky. It breaks this down at a very granular level. So now that we've looked at some of the Microsoft reporting, we have been able to understand what generative AI is used outside of even the Microsoft ecosystem across our environment. What are we going to do to continue to provide enforcement and around some of those non-Microsoft apps? We can typically then look at a tool such as Purview to be able to help us understand what some of that usage is. How can we structure data security posture to protect our organization? What will we do to enforce protection across all those different applications? And then how does Microsoft look at it from a category perspective as well, not only within Microsoft apps, but others as well. as we look at Purview, the easiest way to be able to look at some of our usage of AI apps within the organization, this would be specifically the entry point to looking at how users are putting in queries into things like M365 Copilot, Copilot Chat. We can come into the audit log. We can look at our Copilot activities or our Copilot workloads to get an idea of what type of actions are being done within the environment, and then be able to have that visibility into sometimes their queries, maybe which interactions Copilot has with what data is in our environment. There's a lot of power behind the auditing that we can use very easily without having to set up some of these other tools like data security posture management, which is very interactive. It allows us to be able to follow some guided recommendations and be able to really extend some of the insights. But being able to use that, there are a couple of steps that you need to follow to really start to pull that information within your environment. There's really a better and a best when it comes to data security posture management. In our previous section where we covered Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, if we have our devices onboarded through Defender for Endpoint, that also onboards them to Purview to be able to look at the data that's flowing through those endpoints. But then to extend that even further to be able to look and control some of the data that might be moving in and out of some of those generative AI apps, that would be through enabling the Purview browser extension, which we'll look at here in just a second, by way of how they protect your environment. Edge has it natively built in, so there is no additional capabilities that you need to do. But if you start to look at some of the core browsers like Chrome, like Firefox, which are typically the other two most popular browsers that are seen in the corporate environment, they do have extensions. So if you are a Big Mac shop, if you are using Safari, I will answer the question now that no, there's a plugin for Safari. It would be one of these three that you would consider in your organization as sanctioned web browsers to be able to extend that capability for being able to look at your data inside of those browser extensions. And then being able to, as I mentioned before, that good experience is having your device onboarded with Defender, pushing those extensions with Purview, then enable you to be able to really start to follow through some of these guided recommendations, such as being able to look at sensitive info shared in AI prompts, being able to detect when users visit AI sites over and above the Microsoft ones. We covered some of that inside of the Defender for cloud apps, but then we have the other capability now with Defender with Purview to be able to extend that protection to being able to look at the actual content that's flowing in and out of those AI apps, not necessarily looking at the websites we access, but what data is your users interacting within those websites as well. And then being able to look at some unethical behavior. Let's say users are putting in queries that really would be considered unethical. We can get visibility into some of those as well. Some of this functionality is native within your E5 and Purview. Some of the additional functionality you'll start to see pay as you go. In order to take advantage of that pay as you go with some of these features. So let's say you're looking at specific users, subset of users, or certain applications or websites. If you do have it seen as pay as you go, that's when you'll want to extend your Purview environment from what is considered free or what's part of your E5 to extending that to an enterprise Purview subscription. Essentially, all that is you're connecting it to an Azure subscription where it can take advanced logs and data that come out some of those sessions and storing it within your M365 or storing it within Azure, some of those logs that it's pulling from your M365 environment. This also extends outside of M365. And as you're starting to look at other clouds that you might be using, Google's and your maybe even Amazon's, there's a lot of Defender for cloud capabilities that extend outside of that environment to protect that data too. You usually are looking to enable that Purview enterprise capabilities as well. Inside of Purview, there is a really nice apps and agents blade that looks at some of the top Copilot experiences, Microsoft experiences around AI, but also has the ability to give you usage information around ChatGPT Enterprise, which typically is I'm setting up go up to ChatGPT, and then I just look at those authentications. Outside of that, if your organization doesn't have a ChatGPT Enterprise, you have users that are paying for their own ChatGPT license, which that borders on whether that is a sanctioned or unsanctioned app based on your organization. You can get some of that information as well. And outside of just some of the data, you also have the ability to track how many prompts are used and then the response. Is there data protection around it? Is the data compliant? What agents are in there? So it's really taking that concept of what we saw within the Copilot Control Center and looking at agents, and then starting to build that out broader across AI and enterprise AI apps. So this is one that we'll continue to probably see additional capabilities grow, additional applications such as your Geminis, et cetera, from Google, and having visibility into those. This is a really dashboard to be able to look at some of that usage. Within the DSPM for AI, there's some really great reports when it comes to some of the usage within the organization. This particular one is really looking specifically at activity around the Microsoft tools. We then have some of the granular visibility into what type of AI app access was done, whether that's Copilot in Edge, etc., but also what application it's connected to. So maybe Copilot is connected to Teams or Outlook or M365 apps. It gives you that granular detail of that particular interaction and what Microsoft product that it talked to as part of that interaction as well. So the activity reporting allows you to get really granular. There's a lot of customization around how you want to drill into that data around the Microsoft. But then there's also, if we take that to that next level around some of the activity reporting, there's the ability for you to have visibility into a broader AI use, such as what AI apps are being used outside of the Microsoft ecosystem, like a Copilot, a Gemini, ChatGPT. It allows you to see activity, and then with the policies that we can enact to be able to protect that activity, we can then start to apply DLP to that as well. And that's where we take advantage of that browser plugged in for Purview that is put in place, because then it can not only see, hey, I access these AI sites, but what data was sent to those sites that could potentially be a DLP risk. In looking at really those next steps, and this in itself could be its own presentation, but over and above really some of the reporting capabilities, there's really these 4 core Purview components that you'll want to enable policies for to be able to protect your data. The insider risk allows you to look at detecting how your users are sending data to other applications. Data loss prevention, maybe there is specific types of data we want to protect. That's where DLP look at the content of that's being shared. Some of the adaptive protection, which is going to become more and more prolific, I think, in the next few years, where you'll have an agent inside of your tools like a Purview to help you to be on the cutting edge of how you're looking at your data and protecting your data. And then Communication Copilot 2 really focuses on some of the ethical use of AI and how people might be sending that data to others within the organization, or maybe even using tools like Teams to talk to people outside of your organization, where in some of those cases, some of that communication may be need to be protected and kept within your org versus being externally. So these would be some of the tools that we would use in Microsoft Purview to protect the data. So let's talk about, as we close out the presentation, what are some of those scenarios that we might see where we want to detect unauthorized AI tool usage, being able to use some of the tools that we use to protect our data, and then being able to look at logging, which we talked about previously, take a look at some of those examples as well. As we talked about audit log search inside of Purview, the two most common ones that we see are going to be our activities and our workloads. There's two options there to be able to find that data, to be able to understand where that interaction is. We can see where a user might have taken a file and shared it with a third-party site, or we can see what user data someone has referenced in a Copilot query, and it would actually give us their full SharePoint URL, whether that's going to be inside of OneDrive, Teams, or SharePoint as well. So we can see where that interaction is. As we want to look at what users are putting into those particular prompts, that's where we then start to leverage things like communications compliance, which we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. App usage, we touched on the cloud app discovery. We have that listing of being able to look at the reports. At this point in time, I think there was almost 500 apps in the web that Microsoft recognizes as Gen AI. And if Microsoft sees any of those through the data that flows through your Defender for Endpoint and sends that to Defender for Cloud Apps, it then allows you to build out which ones are specific within your organization. So this really helps you then get an idea of where you have those hotspots of Gen AI use, which ones are going to be your sanctioned apps, which by default Microsoft will always have theirs listed as sanctioned. You'll be able to define yours as well. But then really where are some of the ones that might be risky? Where are the ones that should specifically be considered as unsanctioned? For example, like a DeepSeek, there's a lot of security and privacy risks on that. So within organizations like ours, we have set those as unsanctioned. And then as we talked earlier, having that automatically done through a Defender for Cloud Apps policy is going to give you the most protection without the least amount of admin interaction. Previously, we talked about the asset agents, being able to give you more of a granular look at what some of that capability might be. It's going to give you similar information that we saw within a Viva Insights, but then we have a really nice report here within DSPM to understand where we have user activity prompts and then some of those responses. And this is actually similar with a lot of the other Copilot experiences that we would see from not only the Microsoft world, but as we're looking at users that have interactions with third-party AIs, that Purview browser extension is pulling it in, we'd be able to see some of those same reporting statistics for those as well. And we have the ability, as we look into the DSPM, there's a lot of different little blades around some of the capabilities, being able to monitor interactions, typically looking at things like potential risky AI usage. You can understand what tools your users are using, but this gives us the richer insights into where there may be sensitive information, or where I may need to investigate some of that activity we find through that report as well. And then circling back around to the risky communication, we were able to use Purview Audit to understand what interactions occurred, but really the ability to enable policy within Copilot and communications compliance then allows us to look at a report where we can see that Copilot and BizChat, and we can see what the prompt was that that user utilized. So think of it almost like e-discovery capabilities around Copilot, but within that communications compliance. This will give you those alerts when there may be potentially risky communications occurring in those applications. And then to extend that a little bit further, say that we did have an application that we considered a sanction, but we still want to make sure that users aren't sending sensitive information within those platforms. We have the ability within a DLP policy to look at Teams and chat messages, as our user may potentially be sharing information within your organization or with customers, partners, external organizations. We have the ability to look at how that data flows out of our org through DLP, and we can then restrict the ability to upload that data to a cloud service, or even paste or upload some of that data into the browsers that we talked about before, our Edges, our Chromes, and our Firefoxes. Those would be considered as supported browsers. We have the ability to prevent any user from even being able to paste data or upload files. That capability would come within the DLP protection. And then being able to look at our AI interactions. From a compliance perspective, your organization may have a rule where you say, hey, we're not keeping specific communications longer than a year, or we want to hold on communications for 7 years. Every organization seems to be different. However, we have that flexibility, lifecycle management, and through things like a retention policy to look at our Teams chats and our M365 Copilot interactions, to be able to look at the Microsoft Copilot experience and say, hey, maybe I want to remove any sort of chats that happened with M365 Copilot. With Copilot chat, I want to remove that after a year. Our retention policies and data lifecycle management is the tool we'd be able to use to do that. So we covered a lot of ground today. We covered the tools that we can use. We covered some scenarios. As we close out the session, let's talk about best practices and really how we can educate our users as to why we're enforcing these policies and how that's protecting our organization. As we look at some of those AI principles, it's usually a really good place to start with our end users as to why we only allow certain applications that are AI specific in our organization, because we're looking at ones that abide by the laws. They're fair. They don't train data that isn't relevant. They are, they're not touching everything within our business processes that we haven't defined as ones that should operate under AI, that we're monitoring them and have the ability with those tools to be monitored, and that they are ethical. So as we ingrain this concept of AI, yes, it does help us to work faster and more effectively, but here's where we as an organization are protecting our end users and our data, and where we're looking at the tools and how these really guide which ones we allow. And the ones that, as we're having considerations, we are ensuring they respect intellectual property rights. That's a big concern now with AI and how AI actually works. It's looking at the aggregate of data that is used within the world. And in some cases, we want to ensure that if we're creating content and generating content, that we are actually licensed and being able to use it, not claiming that is our own when we use AI to be able to create it. We also want to make sure that we're enabling and we're empowering and informing our users that they need to have safeguards around what they're putting into AI applications. This is really common when we're talking about organizations that may have a mixture of Copilot for M365, ChatGPT Enterprise. Each of them have their own guidelines of how they store data, and some of them are going to be mindful of our company data. Others, it's just one big pool of everyone's data. That's where we want to empower users to be able to look for those tools and know where they put information. And then finally, accuracy. I can't tell you how many times I've put something into a Copilot or ChatGPT, and yes, it may come back and give me some information very quickly, but there are times where I have to go back in those prompts and say, I know for a fact that this is not right. Can you please try again based on these guidelines? So not taking everything that comes out of AI as gospel is very important to educate your end users on. And then that whole concept of responsible AI use, I think, is very important as well, where it is just a starting point. AI is a tool to enable you to work faster. It's not a tool to replace you. So being able to have it as a means of creating a draft is important, but using that human touch to be able to look and judge and to be able to put your touch on it is very important. Looking at proofing and the content is important. When we talked about fact checking responsible AI use, making sure that they apply not only to your organization's guidelines, but also anything from a compliance or legal perspective is important. Enabling your users, empowering them to where if they see something, to say something. I know we've all heard that many times, but empowering users to know that there's an open door if something does seem questionable, that no, they're not in trouble if they did something that they thought was right and ethical, but something odd happened, and being able to tell them that they should let IT, security, or legal know is important. And then continuing as an IT organization, as a business organization, to keep on top of these guidelines is daunting. I'm not going to lie. Is AI usage is really proliferated in just the 2 years where even Microsoft started to talk about Copilot and it's exploded. Keeping on top of the information is tough. Finding those right sources, looking at those latest guidelines is important to you as admins for being able to protect that use. And we're at the very end. I'll drop this in the chat as well. There's a lot of really great reports that you can access today. If you are an organization that has any varying levels of these licenses, Copilot, Insights, E5, you should be able to access any of these reports. I'll drop those in the chat. As well as I mentioned, if you want to check my website, memphistech.net, that's my blog. I'll be sharing a kind of a summarized version of this presentation in blog format. I'll have that information on there as well. And with that, I will open the floor if there's any other questions. Always great to share.
There was one, Chris, if you take a look at the one that Tom threw in there about are there any options to block or monitor Office add-ins that use AI?
That is a really good one that I've seen, especially considering if you were using M365 apps, a lot of those you would then use a Office apps policy to be able to control which ones are considered allowed or unallowed. By default, some of those policies are just considered to be not configured. So if an add-in is able to be installed easily, then there's really not a way to control the broader use of add-ins. It's really looking at how do we understand what are allowed add-ins in our organization and creating a policy around those. Again, and then this link I'll drop in the chat. I don't know how many of our admins or user group members are here today that are familiar with this portal, but it really gives you a lot of great insights into the add-ins that are being used within your organization, and it allows you to create an Office configuration policy via the web that can push down to all of your M365 apps to say, these are the add-ins that we do allow, and if someone does try to create or just try to install one that isn't allowed, that will get blocked. So from a visibility perspective, that's probably the best place to look at Office add-ins, as well as be able to add a policy that will prevent any new ones to be installed. Great question. That's a hidden gem. If our longtime admins are familiar with the Microsoft Office telemetry, over the last decade, Microsoft rolled that into this portal. So not only does it give you great telemetry around how your Office apps are being used, but also your add-ins, allows you to see things like the health of your OneDrive. There's a lot of really great admin tools within that particular portal.
Perfect. Thanks for the link.
And I will drop those links in right now.
Perfect. And that satisfies Matt's question. And thanks, Jeff, for jumping in on that as well. I know, Jeff, one of the things about the roadmap for GCC to get agent reporting, I don't believe it's out on the roadmap at this point, so I don't think it's coming in September. But nothing else we can actually say at this point until it actually hits the roadmap. All right. Well, Chris, thank you. That was a great session, everybody. Give them a round of applause.